So today I'm going to be discussing, or we're going to be looking at UTME past question, and that's 2023 past question, the one that was written probably last year. We're going to be looking at it in details. I would have even preferred you join me with your own app with you while we go through it. But if you don't have this ExamGuide app, is very, very helpful. I use it for teaching. If you don't have it, please go to Play Store and ensure you download it and get started in your practice. If you check some of our videos, I mentioned one of the important ways or strategy with which you can prepare yourself for the UTME. The ExamGuide is also very key in your preparations, using past questions, and very important. So please go ahead, go to your Play Store and download ExamGuide app. Now, I would like us to start with 40 questions we have here and see how far we can do justice to this and give reasonable answers to these questions. Now, if you are set, let's begin. The first question we have here is, what is autotrophic nutrition? What is autotrophic nutrition? Now, before I go ahead to answer this question, I would like you to understand what autotrophic or nutrition is all about. Now, nutrition is actually one of the important characteristics of living things. All living things undergo nutrition. It means that all living things obtain nutrients, and these nutrients are essential for their growth and healthy living. Now, there are two types of nutrition. We have what we call autotrophic, and we have heterotrophic. Now, it is discovered that there are some organisms that can actually manufacture their own food. They don't depend on other organisms for food, and while there are also other organisms that depend on other organisms for food. An example, so these two types of nutrition, we classify them as autotrophic for the ones which can manufacture their own food, and heterotrophic for the ones that can't manufacture their own food. Now, having that picture in mind, let's look at the options given to us. Because option A says nutrition in which organisms obtain food by breaking down complex organic compounds. Now, organic compounds are simply living organisms. So it means that option A is actually saying that these are organisms that obtain nutrients from other organisms. And that sounds like heterotrophic nutrition. So that is not the correct option. Option B says nutrition in which organisms produce their own food using energy from the sun or inorganic substances. Now, that is the correct answer, but let's still proceed. Look at option C. Option C says nutrition in which organisms obtain food other than, so from other organism. That's also the same thing with option A. And then option D says nutrition in which organisms obtain food by consuming both plants and animals. That's still the same thing. So option A, C, and D, they are actually describing heterotrophic nutrition, while option B is actually explaining or describing or referring to autotrophic nutrition. So one more time, autotrophic nutrition is actually a type of nutrition in which living organisms produce their own food using sunlight, energy from the sun, or energy from inorganic substances. Okay? Now quickly, let's move to the second question, which is question 2. Now, question 2, which of the following is a characteristic feature of kingdom Plante? Characteristics feature of kingdom Plante. Now, this particular question comes from the it was gotten actually from the topic classifications of living things. Now, we have different kingdoms. I think Carolus Linus was actually the man that classified living things into 5 major kingdoms. And these 5 major kingdoms are Kingdom Monera, we have Kingdom Protista, we have Kingdom Fungi, we have Kingdom Plante, which we're going to be looking at briefly, and then we have Kingdom Animalia. kingdom Animalia. Now, kingdom Plante. Now, these are plants actually, and mostly they are green plants. Under kingdom Plante, we have green plants, mostly green plants. They are it's not about non-green plants. The non-green plants, they fall under kingdom fungi. Kingdom fungi. So what we're looking at is green plants. And there is actually an organelle or a structure or a pigment that helps plants to be green. Okay? And that pigment is called chloroplast or chlorophyll, which is found in chloroplast, okay? Which is found in chloroplast. So one of the basic characteristic feature of kingdom Plante, apart from having cell walls or apart from carrying out the process of photosynthesis, is actually the presence of what? Chloroplast. Now look at the options that were given. Option A says presence of chloroplast. Option B says lack of cell walls. Please take note. All kingdom Plantes, they contain what? Cell wall. Their cells are made up of what? Cell wall. But option B says they lack cell wall. So that is not correct. Option C says ability to perform photosynthesis. Yes. All kingdom Plante, they perform photosynthesis. And option D says heterotrophic mode of nutrition. That is simply out of the question. Heterotrophic nutrition is not a mode of nutrition or a type of nutrition that is found in kingdom Plante. No, sir. No. So, but let's take a look at option C and option A. Now, option C is not possible if option A is not present. So the most, the most better, if I may put this one, the better or best option to this particular question is, or most appropriate or best option for this particular question is the presence of chloroplast, because without chloroplast, photosynthesis cannot be achieved. Okay. Now, number of option question 3 says, which of the following soil types becomes less fertile due to intense leaching caused by tropical rains? Now, leaching is actually a situation or a condition in which the top layer of the soil, which contains nutrients, is usually washed out. Is a kind of, I can even call it a form of soil erosion. So here, the top layer of the soil, which contains the nutrients, is being washed away. Now, they said, which of the following soil types becomes less fertile? Now, is it the red soil? Now, the red soil, actually, they have little or no soil fertility. Red soil is mostly the clay soil. We have the black soil. The black soil is usually the loam soil. And if it is black soil, it means that it has enough humus or enough decomposed organic matter. So even if leaching takes place, it does not actually affect it. It does not actually affect it that much. The soil might still be fertile. But if you look at D, which is laterite soil, so the correct option actually to this question is laterite soil. Now look at next question. The next question is question 4. Now question 4 says, which gland is responsible for producing hormone, or the hormone insulin? Now, hormones are actually chemical substances that are produced by endocrine glands, which are produced on the bloodstreams, or they are produced into or released into the bloodstreams and carried to target organs. Produced by endocrine glands, released on the bloodstreams, and then carried to target organs. Now, we have different endocrine glands that produces hormones. We have the pituitary, which is located at the head, precisely the midbrain. and it produces several hormones like the somatotropins, which is a growth hormone. It produces prolactin, it produces oxytocin, and so on. It produces even the ADH, which is the antidiuretic hormones, but it does not produce insulin. Another one again is the thyroid gland, which is located at the neck, and the parathyroid gland, which is also located at the neck. Now, the thyroid gland produces the hormone called thyroxine, which is also a growth hormone, and the parathyroid gland produces parathormone, which is also a hormone. And then we also have the pancreas, which is located on top of the kidney. Now, the pancreas is actually the endocrine gland that produces the hormone called insulin. Now, insulin is helpful or is used to regulate blood sugar. It's used to regulate blood sugar. Option D says pituitary gland. No, not pituitary gland. The pituitary gland, the insulin, the pancreas, please note this, is not located on top of the kidney. It is actually the adrenal gland that is located on top of the kidney. Now, if you look at the structure of the human body, looking at it as relating to the structure, showing the hormonal coordination or the hormones, you will notice that there is something that looks like a leaf. Okay, now that is actually the pancreas, while the adrenal gland produces adrenaline, which is also referred to as emergency hormone. But the insulin is produced by the pancreas, and the insulin, like I said, helps to regulate blood sugar. Okay, so the correct option to this question is option C. Option C. Move ahead. Let's look at question 5. Question 5 says, which of the following is an example of a behavioral adaptation for survival in animals? For survival in animals. Now, option A says wings. Now, first of all, what is adaptation? Now, adaptation is actually the ability of living organisms to survive in a particular environment based on their structural and behavioral features. Now, this brings us to the two types of adaptation. We have structural adaptation, which has to do with the structure, okay, the morphology of these organisms in order to survive. And then we also have the second one, which is behavioral adaptation, which has to do with the physiology. So based on the morphological and physiological features, all right? Now, if you look at it, structure, option A says the wings. The wings is not the correct answer. They said, which of the following is an example of a behavioral adaptation for survival in animals? Wings is a structure, is the structure of the animal. So it does not fall under examples of behavioral adaptation. Migration, let's keep that in mind. Option C says sharp teeth. Now, sharp teeth is also not a response or behavior. No, it is a structure in an organism. So it falls under structural adaptation. Then option D says camouflage. Now, the camouflage is also a structure that is found in the skin. It is not a response. So it falls under structural adaptation for survival. The only one that has to do with a response is migration. Now, migration is a process by which living organisms, okay, or animals, living organisms, most essentially animals, move from one place to another based on climatic factors. Based on climatic factors. So they change environment, they move from one place to another, and that is a response. So this is the correct answer of an example of behavioral adaptation for survival in animals. I hope you understand this. Now, question 6. So let's look at question 6. Question 6 actually says the term cell was given by. Now, if you look at all these options, we're going to narrow down our selections to actually two options. We have option A is debarry. Option B, tartar. Now, both of them never came up with anything that has to do with the cells. Option C says Robert Hooke, and option D says Swan. Now, these two guys, C and D, that's Hooke and Swan, they actually came up with several discoveries about the cells. Now, I think Theodore Swan came up with a discovery that either plant or animals are made up of cells. And in fact, his discovery was actually used for the postulation of the cell theory. And then also Robert Hooke also came up with what a cell actually looks like. But actually, it was Robert Hooke that gave the term cells. He was the one that called cells the name. And that is why he's referred to as the father of cell. He worked with a cell from a cork plant or a cork. Okay, he was using a crude instrument which he used as a microscope, and then he discovered boxes like this thing, of which he called them cells. I think that was in either 1669 or 1605 or 16, within those period. That was how he came up with this discovery of cells. So he is referred to as the father of cells. So the correct option to this particular question is Robert Hooke. Now, question 7, which process in the nutrient cycle converts atmospheric nitrogen into a form that plants can utilize? That converts it into a form that plants can utilize. Now, nutrient cycling is actually the circulation of nutrients in nature. Now, nutrient cycling, we have different types of nutrient cycling. We have water cycle, we have oxygen cycle, we have carbon cycle, we also have nitrogen cycle. Now, what we're actually looking at is nitrogen cycle, as the question implies. It says which process in the nutrient cycle converts atmospheric nitrogen into a form that plants can actually utilize. Option A says nitrogen fixation. Option B says ammonification. Option C says nitrification. And option D says denitrification. Now, if you look at nitrogen fixation, it is actually a process by which atmospheric nitrogen is fixed into the plant or into the soil. They are usually carried out by bacteria. Excuse me. They are usually carried out by bacteria. And these bacteria, an example is the Rhizobium leguminosaureum, which is found at the root nodules of leguminous plants. It helps to fix atmospheric nitrogen into the plant. Okay? Ammonification is actually carried out by also bacteria, in which a bacteria breaks down dead remains of plants and animals into ammonia or ammonium compound. And then nitrification is a process by which nitrifying bacteria converts ammonium compound into nitrites and then converts it from nitrites to nitrates. Now, it has nothing to do with converting atmospheric nitrogen into plants. Okay? And then option D says denitrification. Now, denitrification is actually a process by which nitrates is converted into atmospheric nitrogen and it is returned back to the atmosphere. But in the question we have here, they said converts atmospheric nitrogen into a form that can be utilized by the soil. It simply means you're bringing atmospheric nitrogen to the earth. But denitrification is converting nitrate, which is in the earth, to atmospheric what? Nitrogen. So it's going back to the atmosphere. So the correct option or answer to this question is A, which is nitrogen fixation. Now, question 8 rather. What is the primary source of variation in a population? primary source of variation in a population. Now, what brings about change? Now, variation has to do with morphological and physiological differences which occurs among living organisms. So if we're looking at variation in a population, we're looking at morphological and physiological changes or differences among organisms. Now, natural selection does not bring about variation, no. Gene flow does not bring about variation. Genetic drift does not bring about variation. What brings about variation is actually mutation. Now, mutation is simply an alteration in the genetic constitution of an organism. And it is based on mutation that determines if an organism or a particular population of organism in a population can survive external factors or changes in the external factors of that particular environment. Okay, so the correct answer is mutation. The correct option is mutation. Next is option or question 9, which of the following is a male reproductive organ in humans? A male reproductive organ in humans. Option A says testis. Option B says fallopian tube. Option C says the uterus. Option D says the ovary. Now, please take note. Option B, C, and D are not reproductive organs in males. They are reproductive organs in females. The fallopian tube actually receives eggs, mature eggs, from the ovary, while the uterus is where the embryo is being implanted, where it will be implanted, where it grows, develops into a fetus, and is delivered, while the ovary is actually the site or the part of the female reproductive organ that actually produces the egg cell. So the correct answer to this particular question is the testis. The testis is a part of the male reproductive organ. And the testis carries out two important functions. The testis produces the male sex cell or the male gamete, and also produces the male hormone, sex hormone. The male gamete is called the sperm cell, and the male sex hormone is called the testosterone. So the testosterone and the sperm cell are being produced by the testis, which is located in the male reproductive organ. So the correct answer to this question is option A. Moving ahead, question 10. Question 10 says, what are the primary products of photosynthesis? What are the primary products of photosynthesis? Now, photosynthesis is actually the process by which green plants manufacture their food in the presence of sunlight, water, and carbon dioxide. Okay? In the presence of sunlight, water, and carbon dioxide. Now, if you look at the chemical equation of photosynthesis, I wish I could write it down to show you. We have CO2, which is carbon dioxide, plus, that's at the product or at the reactant side. We have CO2 plus H2O, which is water vapor, reacting. And then we have our reaction arrow. You can put sunlight on top, and then underneath you can put chlorophyll. Now, they will give rise to glucose, which is C6H12O6, plus oxygen that is given off as a gas. So the two byproducts, or the two primary products of photosynthesis is or are glucose and oxygen. So option A says carbon dioxide and water. No, these are the reactants. These are what are used to produce food, okay? Is that number 2 says, or option B says oxygen and water? No. Option C says glucose and carbon dioxide? No. Option D says glucose and oxygen, and that is correct, the byproducts of photosynthesis. Question 11. Now, 11 says, which of the following is the primary organ involved in gas exchange, that is gaseous exchange during respiration in humans? Now, if you could remember, or probably if you take your mind back or look at some of our videos, I was making mention of repeated questions, and I mentioned respiration. Now, under respiration, please always take note of respiration in humans. Now, what are the actual organs that are on the go or that are involved in gaseous exchange? If you look at option A says trachea, option B says bronchi, option C says the lungs, and option D says diaphragm. Now, option A is not the correct answer. Now, the trachea is also known as a windpipe. Now, the trachea is actually a passage for air. It's a passage for air, and it passes through the trachea, which is the windpipe, and enters into the bronchus. The bronchus is also made up of cartilages. Now, it is also a passage through which air enters into the lungs, or into the bronchioles, which is inside of the lungs. And from the bronchioles, it enters into the alveoli, also inside of the lungs. Now, it is in the alveoli that we have gaseous exchange. So there is always gaseous exchange between the lungs and the blood capillaries, because deoxygenated blood goes to the lungs to become oxygenated, and it happens via diffusion. Okay, that's where the gaseous exchange actually takes place. So it is at the lungs that where gaseous exchange occurs. So the correct answer is C. Now, option D says diaphragm. Diaphragm is actually a dome-shaped muscular wall that actually separates the thorax, which is the chest region, from the abdominal cavity. So it has nothing. The abdominal cavity is usually at the stomach area. So it is just below the rib cage, So it is a dome shape, though it plays a major role during breathing in and breathing out of air. But the correct option that is involved in gaseous exchange during respiration in humans is actually the lungs. Next question is question 12. Now, question 12 says, which of the following is an example of physiological variation in organisms? Physiological variation. Now, please take note. Variation, like I said before, is actually, you can define it as morphological and physiological changes or differences which occurs amongst organisms of the same species. I repeat it again. I said variation is referred to as morphological and physiological differences which occurs in organisms or occurs among organisms of the same species. Now, what do we mean by morphology? Morphology is the outward or external feature of an organism, while physiology talks about how these organisms respond, their behavior, their responses, their actions, okay? How the parts of their bodies work or function. All right. Now, when we're talking about morphology, we're looking at outward expressions, while outward external features, while physiology is how these internal features work. Okay, so when we're talking about physiological variation, we are looking at variations that are not external features. They are not features you can actually see. They are actually features that operates in an organism. Now, take a look at A. Option A says differences in fur color. That is the hair color in a rabbit. Now, color is something that is external. It's an external feature. So color, option A, is an example of a morphological variation. Option B says variation in leaf shape in plants. The shape of the leaf is also an external feature. So it is an example of a morphological variation. Option C says variation in blood pressure among individuals. Now, you can't tell me that blood pressure is an external feature. It is not written in the faces of anybody, neither can you see it expressed in an individual. It is not expressed externally, or it is not an external feature that is being observed. So option C probably is the correct option. But let's look at option D. Option D says variation in beak shape. Now, the shape of the beak is also an external feature. Therefore, option D is an example of what? A physiological, an example of a morphological variation. So the correct answer to that particular question, which is of the following, is an example of a physiological variation, is option C. And option C said variation in blood pressure among individuals. Question 13. Which of the following are components of the skeletal system in humans? The skeletal system. The skeletal system. Now, what is actually a skeleton? A skeleton is actually a framework of the body, or a framework which gives the body support, shape, rigidity, and support. Okay, so that is what a skeleton is. Now, in humans, the skeleton is, okay, well, let me say we have about 3 types of skeleton. We have endoskeleton, we have exoskeleton, and then we have hydrostatic skeleton. For humans belong to endoskeletons. It means that their skeleton is located within the body. And these skeletons, a skeletal system in humans, are actually made up of bones and cartilages. They are made up of bones and cartilages. Now look at the questions again there, and they said, which of the following are components of the skeletal system in humans? In humans, A, they said ligaments and tendons. B says bones and joints. C says cartilage and blood vessels, and D says muscles and nerves. Now option C and D are out of the game. Now option C, why is it out of the game? Blood vessels. The skeletal system has nothing for now to do with what? Blood vessels. Now also option D says nerves. Of course, in the skeletal system, we have cartilages, as option C rightly states, and also in the skeletal system, we have muscles, as D also rightly states. But in D, we have nerves. Nerves are not found in the skeletal system in man or in humans. Now, option A and B. Now, option A says ligaments and tendons. Now, what is actually a ligament? A ligament is what holds 2 bones together firmly in a joint, Now, while a tendon is a connective tissue that connects muscles to bones. Okay? Now, in these 2 definitions I have given for option A, they are all explained or all encapsulated in option B. Option B says bones and what? Joints. So what actually makes up the skeletal system in man is not only about ligaments and tendons, but it is about bones and what? Joints. I can also add it up to say bones, muscles, and what? Joints. But if you add muscles are not skeletal. Muscles are not skeletal. Remember when we were talking about the skeleton, we said it is made up of bones and cartilages. Now we have option B, which says bones, and joints are all bones. Okay, so the correct answer to this particular question is option B, bones and joints. Question 14. Which of the following traits is not visible in a person with Down syndrome? with Down syndrome. Now, Down syndrome, I think, is actually a kind of disease that affects people, that makes them of small stature. Of course, it causes short neck and a slant eyes. Okay, their eyes are usually tilted. Okay, it is actually a very bad disease, but it also causes low muscle tone. So the correct option that is not visible in a person with Down syndrome is high muscle tone. So in a person with Down syndrome, the person doesn't have high muscle tone. Neither does the person the person does not have high muscle tone. The person has low muscle tone. The person has slant or tilted eyes. The person has short necks. The person also has a small stature. Question 15. Which of the following functions is performed by the skin to help maintain homeostasis in the human body? Now, what is homeostasis? Now, homeostasis is actually the process by which the body maintains a fairly constant internal environment. A fairly constant internal environment. Now, there are several things that actually affects several changes in our internal environment that usually occurs. These changes can range from temperature changes to solute changes, salt and water balance, and so on. These changes, if not corrected, if not regulated, can bring about disaster or can bring about a fatal effect in an organism. So most organisms have several organs that are actually responsible for regulating the internal environment. If there is a change in the internal environment, there are several organs that are responsible for regulating it. One of the organs responsible for regulation of the internal environment is the kidney. We have the kidney, we have the liver, we have the skin, hence what we're discussing today. We have the skin, we have hormones, and then we also have the brain. So these are organs that are actually responsible for regulating internal environment. Now, as it relates to the skin carries out several functions. One of the functions the skin carries out is that the skin carries out excretory function. Okay, it excretes sweat. The skin also carries out a protection function. It protects the body, okay, against diseases. It protects the body against entrance of microorganisms and so on. Also, the skin carries out the function of homeostasis, osmoregulatory functions, or you can call it regulatory functions. And that regulatory function of the skin is that it regulates body temperature. So option A, the skin does not produce hormones, so it is not correct. Option B, no, the skin does not filter blood. And option D, the skin does not undergo digestion process. But the correct answer is that the skin regulates what? Body temperature. Question 16. Question 16 says, the theory of evolution can be defined as, now when we are looking at the theory of evolution, first of all, you need to understand what evolution is all about. Now, evolution has to do with the sum total of adaptive changes, which has adaptive changes from pre-existing forms over a long period of time, resulting in new structures, forms, and behavior in an organism. Okay, having this knowledge of definition of evolution, you can have an idea of what the theory of evolution is all about. So it is talking about organisms pre-existing before, that the present form of an organism came from pre-existing forms that have been changed over a long period of time. Now look at option A. It says the hypothesis that organisms strive to improve themselves over generations. No, it's not talking about how organisms strive. We said there are adaptive changes that occur in pre-existed times to result in a form and a structure that as we know today. Option B says the idea that species change over time through natural processes. Option C says that the concept that evolution occurs through a series of sudden dramatic change. And then option D says the belief that all species were created in their current form. Option D is totally out of it. Option A is also totally out of it. The two options that actually explains the theory of evolution is B, which is the idea that species changes or species change over time through natural processes, and option C, which says that the concept that evolution occurs through series of sudden dramatic changes. Through series of sudden dramatic changes. It is not a sudden change. It is a change that has occurred over time in my definition. So the correct answer to this question is option B. Okay? When you say sudden, it is a change that happens within a short period of time. A dramatic change is something that happens within a very short period of time. But in our definition for evolution, it is a change that has occurred over a long period of time. And option B explains that better. Okay? Now, quickly moving on to question 17. Question 17 says, which of the following is a characteristic of cells related to irritability? Cells related to irritability. Now, what is irritability? It is simply the ability of living organisms to respond to stimulus or stimuli, or it is the ability of living organisms to respond to both internal and external changes in their environment. Now, if you look at option A, they said ability to replicate DNA. No, it has nothing, irritability has nothing to do with the replication of DNA. B says ability to synthesize proteins. The cells that are actually responsible for synthesis of proteins is the ribosomes. So that's the organelle. Option C says ability to generate energy. Irritability has nothing to do with generation of energy. Actually, the organ that is actually responsible for generation of energy in the organelle, responsible for generation of energy in the cell, is the mitochondria. But option D says ability to respond to stimulus. Ability to respond to stimulus. So that is the correct answer. Ability to respond to stimulus. So option D is our correct option. Next, question 18. Which of the following is evidence of evolution? Which of the following is evidence of evolution? Now, we have several evidences of evolution. Permit me to mention at least three. One, we have the evidence of fossils. Now, fossils are actually dead remains or remains of parts of organisms, of living organisms that have existed for over a very long period of time. We also have the evidence of embryology. We have the evidence of comparative anatomy. We also have the evidence of vestigial organs. Okay, these are some of the evidences of evolution. Now, option A says similarity in embryonic development. That is simply the evidence of embryology. Option B says all of the above. So let's see other options. Option C says homologous structures in different species. Now, this homologous structure in different species, we can also refer to it as comparative anatomy, where we can compare chambers of the heart in different species. Okay, when we are looking at vertebrates, if we're looking at Pisces, amphibians, looking at reptiles, and looking at mammals. In Pisces, they have 2-chambered hearts. In amphibians, 3-chambered hearts. In reptiles, 4 incomplete, and then in mammals we have 4 complete chambers of the heart. And then option D said fossils of extinct organisms. Remember I said that one of the evidence of evolution is fossil records, or evidence of fossil records, okay? So what is our answer to this particular question in 18, or question 18? Said which of the following is evidence of evolution? The correct option to this question is option B, all of the above. So all of the above, similarities in embryonic development, homologous structures in different species, fossils of extinct organisms, all of these are evidences of evolution. Evidences of evolution. Please also take note of frequent questions or repeated questions, or questions that are topics that are usually repeated. You can see we have almost done at least 2 or 3 questions relating to evolution. Hence, I said that evolution comes up every year. Evolution comes up every year. So it is a repeated topic in mostly UTME and SSC or WAEC, okay? So please take note of that. Question 19. The alternate form of a gene. The alternate form of a gene is, now the alternate form of a gene, or that's the alternative form of a gene, is the allele. Now alleles are actually a pair of genes, or a pair of genes that can be the same or they can be different. For instance, I can have a pair of allele which I can represent as a tall plant, which is capital letter T, capital letter T. We can also have it as capital letter T, small letter t. So an allele is the alternate form of a gene, not dominant character. Dominant character is actually the character that is being expressed in an offspring or in an individual, while recessive character is the character that is hidden in an individual but can be expressed in future generations. And option B, alternate type, has nothing to do with genetics. So this is also another topic that comes up frequently, and that topic is genetics. So please take note of it. Question 20. The question says, which is the term used to describe maximum number of individuals of a species that an environment can support? What the environment can support, or you can say, in other words, what the environment can carry, what it can accommodate. So the correct answer is option D, which is its carrying capacity. Please, it is not ecological niche. Ecological niche is the specific portion in a habitat or in an environment where an organism can be found and the role that particular organism plays in that specific portion. An example is a tree. A mango tree can be found in a particular place. Now, what is the function or the role of that mango tree in that particular environment? One, it can be used as as food for living organisms. Okay, it can serve as food for living organisms. It can also serve as a windbreaker. It can also serve as help in purifying the atmosphere by adding oxygen to it. So these are the roles it plays, and that's what we call ecological niche. There is nothing I don't know about. In fact, option B, density-dependent factor, is totally out of the question. Option C is limiting factors. Now, the limiting factors are those factors that resist or inhibit the functioning of an ecosystem, okay, that affects the functioning of an ecosystem, or that affects the functioning of an ecosystem or environment. Examples include diseases. Examples like availability of food, space. These are several limiting factors. Now, the question there has nothing to do with limiting factors. It also has nothing to do with ecological niche, but it has everything to do with the carrying capacity. So the correct option or answer to this particular question, or question 20, is D, the carrying capacity. Question 21. Which component of blood is responsible for carrying oxygen to the body tissues? Carrying oxygen to the body tissues. Now, the blood, I said before, the blood is divided into two main parts. Or you can call them components of the blood. We have the blood cells and we have the blood plasma. Now, the blood cells, we have the red blood cells, we have the white blood cells, and we have the platelets, and then we also have the plasma. Now, the reason why I'm explaining this, if you look at the options, they mentioned all this. They mentioned the blood cells and the blood plasmas as options. A says the blood plasma, B says white blood cells, C says platelets, and D says red blood cells. Now, for you to be able to answer these questions correctly, this particular question correctly, you need to note the functions of each of these parts of the blood or components of the blood. Now, the plasma is mainly the liquid part of the blood. It's pale yellow. It carries out the function of transporting digested food, enzymes, excretory waste, hormones from one part of the body to another. Option B says white blood cells. The white blood cells are mainly for defense. We have the white blood cells, they produce what we call lymphocytes. And these lymphocytes, they produce antibodies. Antibodies are like soldiers, okay? They help to defend the body against microorganisms or foreign organisms that will enter into the body. Option C says platelets. Now, platelets is also called thrombocytes. They are the third part of the blood cells. Is a part of the blood cells. Remember, I said the blood cells, there are three blood cells. We have the white blood cells, which we have mentioned in option B. We have the platelets, which is option C. And the major function of the platelets is for clotting of blood. Clotting of blood. And clotting of blood is carried out to reduce loss of blood and also protect the body from microorganisms entering into the body through those cut areas or injured areas. And then option D says red blood cells. Now, the red blood cells, they have an ion compound which is called hemoglobin. Now, hemoglobin has a strong affinity for oxygen. It means it binds readily with oxygen. So hemoglobin, so the red blood cells, with the aid of hemoglobin, transports oxygen from one part of the body to another. So question 22 says, which of the following represents an example of ecological management and conservation through a biological association? Now, if you look at the meaning of ecological management and conservation, now ecological management and conservation has to do with strategies and practices that are involved in actually protecting and preserving the ecosystem, the natural ecosystem, okay? Preserving things in the ecosystem. Now, if you have this mentality or this understanding, it will give you your right answer. That is, you are preserving the ecosystem. Preserving the ecosystem. Take note. A says establishment of marine protected areas. B says construction of dams for hydroelectric power. C says introduction of an invasive species for pest control. And D says clear cutting of forests for timber extraction. Now, of course, let me start with option D. Option D is not protecting or preserving natural ecosystem. No, it's not. Now, the natural ecosystem includes mostly the wildlife, forest reserves, okay? Forest reserves, the waters, and so many other things, because there are several wildlife or creatures or animals and even plants that are found in water reserves, okay? Now, D is clearing and cutting them down. Forest reserves, that means it is not a strategy of preserving natural ecosystem? No. Option C says introduction of an invasive species for pest control. Pest control is usually applied when you are looking at your farm, okay? Because these pests, they are natural existence. They are part of the natural ecosystem. So if you are now getting rid of the natural ecosystem, you are not actually preserving it. It is not a method or strategy of preserving it. Option B says construction of dams for hydroelectric power. Now, the construction of dams is just to conserve water, and not just the organisms in the water. No, it's to conserve water, not the organisms in quotes, for hydroelectric power, so as to power or generate electricity. But look at option A, establishment of marine protected areas. Now that sounds like a strategy used or involved or practiced to help preserve the natural ecosystem. Of course, marine waters is an example of a natural ecosystem. This is a habitat, they are habitats. And I remember I mentioned that habitats, we have aquatic as well as terrestrial habitat. So protecting and preserving our natural ecosystem or our natural habitat and the organisms that are found in it. When you're talking about marine habitat, you have so many organisms that are found in marine water habitats. We have the cartilaginous fishes and so many others. We have the dolphins. We have so many organisms that can be found in marine water habitat. So establishment of a protected area for these marine habitats is actually a way of managing and conserving natural ecosystems. So the correct answer to this particular question is option A. Option A. Question 23. Which of the following is an example of an adaptation for survival in social insects? Adaptation for survival in social insects. Now, A says, what are social insects, for instance? Now, social insects are actually insects that are well organized, and they have what we call groups, or a group or organization of which they delegate functions and carry out, in fact, they are well organized. Let me put it that way. They are well organized. They are groups, and they possess what? Groups. We call them castes. Okay? Now, examples of social insects, we have bees, we have termites, okay? They fall under social insects, bees and what? Termites. Now, how do they adapt for survival? A, is it formation of complex caste system? B, is it hibernation? I don't think they undergo hibernation during winter months. C, is it production of venom for defense? Well, actually they do produce venom for defense. We have the bee, they produce venom which they sting for defense. We also have the soldier termites which they also sting for actually defense, but it is not for survival. It is not for survival. It is actually for defense or protection, not for survival. Option D says migration to warmer climates. Well, it is actually difficult to see migration in social insects. Actually difficult to see migration in social insects. The place where the only aspect where you see migration in social insects is probably in termites, where some castes, which are the reproductives, they leave a particular colony to undergo the nuptial flight in order to start up a new colony. But it is not actually for survival. But the actual option that explains or gives a perfect that is a perfect example for adaptation for survival in most social insects is the formation of complex caste system. Formation of complex caste system. Let me give an example using termites. Now, termites, they have a caste system which helps so much. They have the reproductives. Now the reproductives, that's where you get the king, the queen, and also you have other young reproductives which can be males and females, and they have wings for flight. Now, these are the ones that carry out reproduction, and one of the purpose for reproduction is to ensure continuous existence. So they are responsible for continuous existence of that species. And then we also have another caste which is called the workers. Now, the workers, they carry out several jobs. They help take care of the larvae of the young ones. They help in building of the caste of their colony, that is the materium, and they help in so many other works. And then we have the last one, which is called the soldiers. Now the soldiers, they have a big mandibles, they have a big head, and they have poisonous things which they use for protection, to protect the colony. They help in protecting the colony. Now for these termites, or which is a social insect, to actually survive, that means that these caste must be fully effective for their survival. For their survival as a colony, it must be fully effective. So the correct answer and option to this particular question is formation of complex caste system. 24. Which processes are involved in nutrient cycling in a functioning ecosystem? Now, which process are involved in nutrient cycling? Remember I said that nutrient cycling entails a whole lot. We have water cycle, we have carbon cycle, we have oxygen cycle, and then we also have nitrogen cycle. Now option A says erosion, weathering, and sedimentation. No, it has nothing to do with nutrient cycling. Option B says nitrogen fixation, denitrification, and ammonification. Of course, that's the correct option. Nitrogen fixation has to do with processes through which atmospheric nitrogen is being utilized or fixed on earth or to the soil or to plants so that they can make use of it. And denitrification is actually the process by which these nitrates are converted to atmospheric nitrogen and returned back. You can see that there is a cycle. Okay, nitrogen fixation brings it down, denitrification takes it up. So it is a continuous cycle, while ammonification has to do with the breaking down of dead remains of plants and animals by bacteria or some organisms into ammonium compound. And there are also some other organisms that breaks down that ammonium compound into nitrites, and also some other bacteria that breaks down nitrites into nitrates. And this nitrate is what is being used up by plants. So for me, nutrient cycle, the process is that are involved in nutrient cycle in a functioning ecosystem is option B. Now option C says respiration, photosynthesis, and transpiration. Option D says decomposition, evaporation, and precipitation. Now decomposition, evaporation, and precipitation, that's waters, almost like water cycle. While respiration, photosynthesis, and transpiration has to do mainly, if you look at it, it involves mainly carbon cycle. But I think what they are actually looking at is supposed to be nitrogen cycling in a functioning ecosystem. And that option is B, option B. Question 25. A biome characterized by hot summer, warm winter, and treeless vegetation is a steep grassland. That is the correct answer. It is a steep grassland. Now, a steep grassland, the summer is usually very hot. The winter is supposed to be cold, but in a steep grassland, the winter is also warm. And you see no vegetation, no trees at all. In a temperate desert, the summer is usually hot. The winter is also probably hot or even cold at night. And then you see no vegetation, but there are some areas in a temperate desert rather, the summer is cold, the winter period is more cold, and then you see little or no vegetation. But in a tropic desert, the summer is hot. The winter is also probably hot because there is no winter in tropical areas. And then you see little or no trees. And then in a savanna, of course, the savanna is not part of it. It has nothing to do with winter, but the steep grassland has something to do with what? Winter. And winter is usually warm with treeless vegetation. Question 26. What is the tissue responsible for transporting water and minerals from the roots to the rest of the plants? Now, A says parenchyma. Parenchyma is not a transport tissue in plant. Parenchyma is a supporting tissue in plant. It provides support and strength to plants. Is it epidermis is also not a transport tissue, but a supporting tissue. Now, phloem and xylem, they are supporting tissues, they are transport tissues in plants as well as supporting tissues in plants. So they carry out supporting and transports. Okay, that's C and D, phloem and xylem. But the phloem transports or conducts manufactured food from the leaves to the roots and other parts of the plants and not water, while the xylem transports or conducts water and dissolved mineral salts from the roots to the leaves and other parts of the plant. So the correct answer to this question is option D. Option D. 27. Which of the following statement about the heart is true? Now, I remember I said that the heart is a muscular organ. It's a muscular organ. And it functions by contraction and relaxation. Now, let's take a look at some of the options that were given about the heart and see which one is actually correct and why. A says the heart is a muscular organ that contracts. I remember I just said so. It contracts to circulate blood throughout the body. B says the heart receives blood from the kidney and filters waste product. Very wrong. The heart does not receive blood from the kidney. The heart, it actually receives blood mostly, but it does not filter waste product. It is the kidney that filters waste product. Now, blood goes into the kidney from the heart through what we call the renal arteries. So the renal arteries receives blood from the heart into the kidney, while the renal vein takes out blood from the kidney to other parts of the body or including the heart. Okay, so the blood or the heart actually receives blood from the kidney, but the heart does not filter waste product. It is the function and the job of the kidney. Option C says the heart pumps oxygenated blood to the lungs. Wrong. The heart does not pump oxygenated blood. The heart pumps deoxygenated blood to the lungs so that it can be oxygenated when it gets to the lungs. Now, it is the pulmonary arteries that carries blood from the right ventricle to the lungs to be oxygenated. Once it is oxygenated, it returns from the lungs through the pulmonary veins into the heart or into the left auricle of the heart, and from the left auricle to the left ventricle, from the left ventricle, it passes out from the heart oxygenated through the aorta to other parts of the body. Okay, so option C is also wrong. Option D says that the heart is responsible for the production of red blood cells. Wrong. Option D is also wrong. The heart is not responsible for production of red blood cells. The heart is actually not responsible for production. What is actually responsible for the production of red blood cells is the bone marrow. The bone marrows are responsible for production of red blood cells. So in other words, our correct option or answer to this particular question is option A, which says that the heart is a muscular organ that contracts to circulate blood throughout the body. Moving ahead, question 28. The membrane around the vacuoles. The vacuoles is found both in plants and animals. The vacuoles in animals are usually small. In some animals, it is called contractile vacuoles, and it carries the function of osmoregulation. In plants, it is usually large and centrally placed, and it is filled with cell sap. Okay, it helps also in the transportation of essential materials in plants or in the cells of plants. And then also we said that a membrane surrounds the vacuoles. Now the membrane is not the elaioplast, it is not the amyloplast, it is not the cytoplast, there's nothing like cytoplast, but the correct answer is the tonoplast. The tonoplast is a membrane that surrounds the vacuole. The membrane of the vacuole is called tonoplast. Next is question 29. Which of the following is an evolutionary trend commonly observed in organism? Evolutionary trend. A says increased genetic diversity within populations. B says decreased complexity over time. C says decreased adaptation to the environment. And then D says increased dependence on external sources. Now, once since it has to do with evolution, remember I told you that questions on evolution always comes. So please go and study evolution. You can check our videos and see questions on discussion on evolution. It is something that comes out always. These are most repeated topics in biology. So we have the correct answer is actually A. Evolution has to do with genetic diversities. That is a change, increased change within a population, but it happens over time, over a long period of time. So the correct answer is A. A is the correct answer. Question 30. Which of the following is an example of abiotic ecological factors? Now, one of the best ways to actually answer this question is to look at the meaning of abiotic. Now, when you hear the word biotic, it has to do with living organisms. When you hear the word abiotic, it has to do with non-living organisms. Everything that has to do with non-living organisms, temperature, what have you, all these temperature, as climatic factors, edaphic factors, which has to include soil types, soil structure, soil profile, and so on, topographic factors like mountains, hills, valleys, all these are abiotic factors. But when we are talking about biotic factors, it includes all things that has to do with with living things or living organisms. Now the question again, which of the following is an example of an abiotic ecological factor? So abiotic, what we're going to be looking out for is something that has nothing to do with living organism. Option A says temperature. So of course, temperature has nothing. It doesn't involve living organism. Temperature is a climatic factor. Okay, so it is abiotic. Option B says competition. Now, competition is something that has to do with living things or living organism. In fact, it is a characteristics of living things. Okay, so competition always exists between living organisms. Option C says predation. Now, predation is a type of biological association. Okay, it's a type of biological association of which one organism kills another for food. The one that kills is called a predator. The one that is killed is called a prey. So it has to do with living organisms. So it's biotic. Option D said symbiosis. Now, symbiosis is also a type of biological association in which two organisms benefit from each other mutually. They benefit from each other. Okay, so it also involves what? Living organism. So the only one that has to do with abiotic factors is what? Temperature, which is a climatic factor. So the correct answer to this question is what? A. Next, 31. What is the definition of population ecology? What is the definition of population ecology? Of course, we know that population has to do with the total number of organisms of the same species living in a particular place at a particular time. Now, armed with that particular understanding, look at the options we have there. Now, ecology has to do with the relationship between organisms and their environment. Look at option A, the study of interaction between different populations in an ecosystem. Somehow. B says the study of interaction between organisms and their physical environment. C says the study of the distribution and abundance of all individuals within a species. And D says the study of evolutionary processes and their effects on population. Now, option D is totally out of the question. Option A and B are almost similar. Says there are interaction between different populations. Okay. Now, option A is interaction between only population in an ecosystem, while option B says it's a study of the interaction between organisms and their environment. But when you look at population talks about the abundance of things, the number of people in a particular place. So it has to do with the study of the distribution and abundance of individuals within a species. So my correct option is C. Next, 32. Which of the following is an example of microorganisms in action? Microorganisms in action. Now, as a disease vector, okay, let's repeat that question again. Which of the following is an example of microorganisms in action as a disease vector? Now, A says mosquito transmits malaria. Now, when you're looking at microorganisms don't move on their own per se. They are being transmitted. They are being carried from one place to another. Now, we have what we call carriers of microorganisms. Carriers of microorganisms. There are actually two main types. We have the living carriers and the non-living carriers. The living carriers are referred to as vectors, while the non-living carriers are referred to as non-living things like air, we have food, we have water, and so on. Okay, these are the non-living carriers of microorganisms. Now, but if you look at the options we have there, they are referring to living carriers, which are vectors. Now, look at option A. They said mosquito transmitting malaria. B said fungi decomposing dead plant materials. Now, decomposition has nothing to do with diseases. Decomposition has nothing to do with diseases. Option C says bacteria causing food poisoning. Well, yes, bacteria causes food poisoning, but there is no vector in option C. At least there's supposed to be a vector that carries a particular bacteria and transmits a particular disease. Option D says algae producing oxygen through photosynthesis. Photosynthesis is not a disease. It has nothing to do with diseases. So the correct answer is A, which is mosquito transmitting the disease called what? Malaria. So mosquito is a disease vector. So it carries the pathogen called Plasmodium falciparum. Now, it is this Plasmodium falciparum that causes what? Malaria. Okay? Next, question 33. Which of the following is not a part of the alimentary canal? Now, the alimentary canal is usually called gastrointestinal walls. Okay? It is called gastrointestinal walls. Now, there are long tubes, okay, that runs from the mouth to the anus, and they are responsible for carrying out the process of digestion. Now, we have different alimentary canals in different organisms. Now, actually, If you look at the question there, the alimentary canal for a particular organism wasn't mentioned. The question is just which of the following is not a part of the alimentary canal. Now, option A is small intestine. The small intestine is, please note, is a part of the alimentary canal. If I may mention the alimentary canal of man. The alimentary canal of man starts with the mouth. From the mouth, we have the esophagus. Esophagus, we have the stomach. From the stomach, we have the duodenum. From the duodenum, we have the small intestine. From the small intestine, we have the large intestine. From the large intestine, we have the cecum and appendix. We have the rectum, and then we have the anus. These are the alimentary canal in man. Now, A says small intestine, correct. B says esophagus, correct. C says large intestine, correct. But D says the liver. Now, the liver per se is not an alimentary canal, but the liver can be found in the duodenum and it carries a function under digestion. But what we're looking at per se is the alimentary canal. So the correct one that is not a part of the alimentary canal is what? The liver. The liver. So option D. Okay, let's take a look at question 34. Now, question 34 says, which organs are part of the alimentary canal in human digestive system? So which of them is part of the alimentary canal in human digestive system? Now, let's take a look at option A, B, C, and D. A says salivary gland, tongue, and pharynx. Now, the salivary gland and the tongue, they play a major role in digestion. It is actually found in the mouth, which is also a part of the alimentary canal. Okay, but the pharynx, as it relates to humans, the alimentary canal of a human does not include pharynx. But in other organisms, such as earthworm, grasshopper, and so on, they have pharynx as their alimentary canal, but not in humans. Now, the function of the pharynx is replaced with that in humans with the esophagus. So option A is not the correct option. Now let's look at option B. Option B says large intestine, appendix, and rectum. Now, in humans, the large intestine is part of the alimentary canal. The rectum is also part of the alimentary canal. But the appendix is not part of the alimentary canal, being that the appendix does not carry out any function in digestive system or in digestion. The appendix is referred to as a vestigial organ. It doesn't carry out any known function as it relates to digestion. Option C says esophagus, pancreas, and small intestine. Now, the esophagus allows the passage of food from the mouth to the stomach. And it undergoes the process or the movement called peristaltic movement. The pancreas secretes 3 enzymes. It is located in the duodenum, and it secretes 3 enzymes, which are amylase, trypsin, and lipase, which are responsible for the digestion of carbohydrates, fats, and oils, as well as proteins. Now, also the small intestine is, in fact, that is where digestion is completed and absorption takes place. So you can see that option C is the correct answer per se, is the correct answer because it involves the processes of digestion. Now, option D doesn't. Now, the stomach, yes, is part of the alimentary canal. The liver, like we mentioned, that of the pancreas in option C, can be considered as part of the alimentary canal because the pancreas and the liver are both found inside of the duodenum. Okay, but the next one is gallbladder. Gallbladder plays no major role in digestion. The only thing it does not produce any enzyme. It does not bring about digestion process. No, it only stores bile, which is produced by the liver. Now, the bile is what carries out the function of digestion and not the gallbladder. The gallbladder is where it is stored temporarily. So the gallbladder is not part of the alimentary canal, and therefore our correct option and answer is option C. Option C is the correct answer. So we are picking C as our answer. Now, question 35. It says there, behavioral adaptation for dealing with hot climates could include. Now, there are three behavioral adaptation that deals with hot climate, or that deals with adverse weather condition. Hot climate is an adverse weather condition. Number one is what we call estivation. Number two is hibernation. And number three is migration. This is what living organisms do, or mostly animals. They either undergo estivation. Estivation is a period of inactivity, okay, where they have mostly when the environment or the climate is very hot and the place is usually very dry. You see that in crocodiles. Also, you see that in mudfish. Okay, they undergo estivation, a period of inactivity. They act as if they are not active, but don't go close. You might be injured. In terms of a crocodile, it acts as if it is inactive when the weather is very hot, when the place or the creek is also very dry. So the correct answer, if you look at all the options listed there, the correct answer is supposed to be estivation and not hibernation. The correct answer is D, which is hibernation, but it is supposed to be estivation, because estivation is a period of inactivity during hot climatic weather or condition or factors. Now, option B. Okay, the next one is hibernation. I'm giving three behavioral adaptations for dealing with hot climate or adverse weather condition. Number one, I said it's estivation. Number two, I said is hibernation. Now, hibernation is a period of deep sleep. Most organisms go into deep sleep in periods like in winter, or when there is low availability of food and water. They go into a period of deep sleep. An example is the bear. Okay, the bear. It goes into a period like the polar bear. They go into a period of deep sleep until when, or just the bear, it can be the grizzly bear, until when conditions are favorable, they then wake. They go into this deep sleep for months. And it's also a way of them adapting to adverse weather conditions. An option, the third one is migration. That's the third ways living organisms, mostly animals, deal with hot or adverse weather conditions. So they migrate. Migrate is moving from one place where the climatic condition is very bad and moving to a place where the climatic conditions can be favorable. But they can return back to their original place when everything becomes favorable. Okay, so this is what we call these are the three important behavioral adaptation to adverse weather conditions. Now, armed with this particular knowledge, let's look at the options again. A, feeding during the hottest part of the day, wrong. B, large scales on the back of a lizard. In fact, that is a structural adaptation, not behavioral. C, a small kidney to conserve water. That is also structural adaptation, not behavioral. And option D says hibernating during the hottest part of the day. Hibernating, which can be sleep, a deep sleep. And I said we have three of them. We have estivation, hibernation, and migration. Hibernation is mentioned as option D. Therefore, hibernation is the correct answer. Question 36, they said the natural place of an organism or community is known as habitat. So that is the correct answer, habitat and not habit. It is habitat, it is not niche, Ecological niche is a specific place where these organisms can be found and the role they play, while the biomes is then a naturally occurring ecosystem where living organisms interact with themselves and also with their environment. But that is not a natural dwelling place for living organisms. So the correct answer and option is D. 37. Which of the following processes is involved in the reproduction of developing organisms? Now listen to the word developing organisms. The correct answer is fertilization, because during fertilization, fertilization has to do with the union of gametes, which produces what we call a zygote. The zygote then develops into an embryo. The embryo then develops into a fetus before it is being delivered. You can see that these are progressive developments, okay, in reproduction. And fertilization is a type of sexual reproduction. So where you see development of organisms in reproduction is in sexual reproduction and not in asexual reproduction. Option B says budding. Budding is a type of asexual reproduction in which an organism has an outgrowth. So where there is an outgrowth from an organism which looks like the same organism, that outgrowth continues until when it is fully formed, it detaches. If it falls on a suitable environment, it grows out to become a living organism. So that is not a developing organism, okay? Then option C is germination. Now germination is mostly in terms of seeds. That is where seeds actually germinate in order to bring forth living organisms. But before germination will take place, fertilization is involved. Fertilization of flowering plants is involved before germination occurs. So which of the following processes is involved in the process of developing organism? It is actually fertilization. Pollination is simply the transfer of pollen grains from the anther to the stigma of a flower. It is not the process that brings about developing organism. The correct answer, henceforth, is actually fertilization. Fertilization covers both plants as well as animals. Germination and pollination covers only plants. Okay, but they did not state in the question whether it is both plants and animals. So in other words, the question covers both plants and animals. So the correct answer is option A. Option A is correct. Question 38. Most fishes do not sink in water because of the presence of 1. Swim bladder, 2. Air bladder, 3. Air sacs, 4. Air in spongy bones. Now the correct answer is 1 and 2, and that is option C. 1 and 2. Now swim bladder helps these organisms, both the swim bladder and the air bladder helps fishes to float in water. Note, swim bladder and air bladder helps fishes to float in water, or it helps give them buoyancy. Buoyancy simply means ability to float. So the swim bladder and the air bladder are for buoyancy. Now, air sacs and air in spongy bones are usually found in flight animals that are found in the air, like birds. They have air sacs. They also have air in their spongy bones, which helps them to become light. It makes them light so as to be carried in air. All right, so the correct answer is 1 and 2, which is option C. And question 39, which type of reproduction involves the fusion of gametes from 2 parents? Now, we have 2 types of reproduction actually. Reproduction is simply the process by which living organisms give rise to new individuals after their kind or of the same species. Now we have 2 types of reproduction, we have sexual and we have asexual reproduction. Now, in sexual reproduction, two parents are involved. In sexual reproduction, gametes are produced. In sexual reproduction, there is fusion of gametes. I have mentioned three important things. But in asexual or asexual reproduction, two parents are not involved, rather it is only one parent that is what? Involved. In asexual reproduction, gametes are not produced. In asexual reproduction, there is no fusion of gametes. Now the question says, which type of reproduction involves the fusion of gametes from two parents? So the correct answer to this question is option B, which is sexual reproduction. Option B, sexual reproduction. And then finally, question 40. This is the topic under genetics. In monohybrid inheritance, if an organism carries two different alleles for a particular gene, it is called what? Two different alleles for a particular gene is referred to as heterozygous. If they are different, it is heterozygous. If they are the same, it is homozygous. For instance, an example is big T, small t. Now, the big T symbolizes tall trees. Let me use for plants. And small t represents short plants. Now, when I put them together, it becomes big T, small t. That is an allele, okay? We also have big T, big T. You can see that they are the same, all right? Big T, they are the same allele. But big T, small t, they are different alleles containing two different genes. Then I can also have small t, small t. This is also two different two the same genes in the alleles, okay? Or two alleles that are the same. So when they are the same, it is called homozygous. When they are different, it is called heterozygous. Now, as the question implies, the correct answer and option is option A, which is heterozygous, okay? So this brings us to the end of this past question, revision on this past question, UTME 2023. I hope you had a nice time. Please do well, if you don't have the ExamGuide app, do well to download it from your Play Store. See you next class. Bye for now.